The year is 1940. The world, a fragile tapestry of nations and ideologies, is tearing itself apart. Across the English Channel, the shadow of Nazi Germany looms large, its war machine having swept through Europe with terrifying speed and brutal efficiency. Britain stands alone, a solitary bastion against a tide of tyranny, its very survival hanging by the slenderest of threads. The fate of freedom, the destiny of a continent, indeed, the future course of human history itself, rests squarely on the courage of a few and the steadfastness of an island nation under siege, facing down an enemy seemingly unstoppable in its advance. The air was thick with the scent of fear and defiance, the sounds of distant bombs a constant, chilling reminder of the proximity of utter devastation. Every citizen felt the weight of history pressing down, every decision, every action imbued with monumental significance. From the skies, the threat was most palpable, most immediate, a relentless aerial onslaught designed to break the spirit of a nation. Day after day, wave after wave, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, pounded Britain, its bombers targeting cities, its fighters seeking to annihilate the Royal Air Force. This was the Battle of Britain, a conflict waged not on land or sea, but in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the sky. It was a battle for aerial supremacy, a desperate struggle where every dogfight, every interception, every sortie held the weight of untold consequences. The stakes were astronomical, the pressure immense, almost unbearable, and the raw courage of the young pilots, both British and from allied nations, was a sight to behold, a testament to the indomitable human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. These weren't seasoned veterans of long wars, but often young men, barely out of their teens, thrust into a maelstrom of metal, fire, and sudden death. Their days were a cycle of tense waiting, explosive combat, and somber reflection, marked by the ever-present knowledge that a single mistake or a twist of fate could end their story in a blaze of glory or a silent, lonely plunge. At the heart of Britain's aerial defense, a sleek, elegant, and deadly machine soared, the Supermarine Spitfire. More than just an aircraft, the Spitfire was a symbol. It was the embodiment of hope, a defiant roar against the enemy's thunder, a sliver of silver against the vast blue, cutting through the fear. Its elliptical wings, a marvel of aerodynamic design, its powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engine humming with a deep, resonant growl, its incredible agility and devastating firepower made it the envy of the world. For the British people, huddled in bomb shelters or watching the contrails crisscross the sky, the sight of a Spitfire was a reassurance, a promise that their defenders were out there, fighting tooth and nail, holding the line. For the pilots, the Spitfire was an extension of themselves, a trusted steed in the deadly joust of aerial combat, a partner in the dance of death. They loved their aircraft, revered its capabilities, and relied on its performance with their lives. Every single time they climbed into its cramped cockpit, strapping themselves into a symphony of controls, gauges, and sheer power, preparing for the unknown. Yet, beneath this gleaming veneer of invincibility lay a dark, insidious secret. A flaw, subtle yet catastrophic, threatened to cripple Britain's air defense from within, an internal enemy far more treacherous than any external foe. It was a problem that manifested not in the heat of a level dogfight, where the Spitfire was supreme, a master of its domain, but in the very maneuver often required to gain the crucial upper hand, to press home an advantage, to break from danger, the dive. When a Spitfire pilot, spotting an enemy bomber or fighter below, would push their stick forward, sending their machine plummeting earthward at terrifying speed, gravity would turn from an ally into an assassin. In that critical moment, that heart-stopping plunge, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the very heart of the Spitfire, would often sputter, cough, and tragically die. It was a betrayal from within, a mechanical self-sabotage that shocked and terrified those who experienced it. Imagine the scene. A young pilot, perhaps named Arthur, barely 20 years old, his eyes sharp, adrenaline coursing through his veins, locked onto a distant target. The Spitfire, alongside its robust, formidable contemporary, the Hawker Hurricane, formed the impenetrable core of Britain's aerial shield, the very guardians of its skies. If these magnificent machines, and more importantly, their valiant pilots, couldn't effectively engage in dynamic, aggressive combat, if their pilots were paralyzed by this insidious, hidden flaw, then the air defense of the entire nation was fundamentally compromised. The crucial ability to execute a high-speed dive, to break away with agility, to pursue relentlessly, and to attack decisively was absolutely fundamental to their established combat doctrine. Without it, their tactical advantage, their very operational effectiveness, was severely and dangerously hampered, leaving them vulnerable and reactive rather than dominant. The threat was clear, unambiguous, and terrifyingly immediate. Unless this critical, life-threatening flaw was addressed, and addressed with the utmost urgency, the Battle of Britain might indeed conclude with a very different, far more tragic outcome. The Luftwaffe, already possessing a numerical superiority that strained the RAF to its breaking point, would gain an almost insurmountable tactical advantage, their pilots free to dive and escape without fear, while their British counterparts were literally grounded by the very physics of their own engines. The once comforting roar of the Merlin engine, designed to signify unparalleled power, unwavering protection, and righteous fury, was in those critical, gut-wrenching moments becoming a terrifying harbinger of doom, a silent testament to betrayal. The very machines painstakingly built to save Britain were, at times, inadvertently endangering their own most precious assets, their pilots, threatening to undermine the entire monumental war effort from within. The desperate, urgent search for a viable solution had begun, but the merciless clock of wartime necessity was ticking relentlessly, and the skies over Britain remained a deadly, unforgiving arena where human lives and the future of global liberty hung precariously in the balance with every single desperate dive. The silent, insidious killer lurking within the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine demanded an answer, a definitive, lasting fix, and it demanded it now, with a ferocity born of dire necessity. The stakes, truly, could not have been higher, for the very survival of a free world depended on it. The question that echoed across airfields and engineering workshops alike was not merely who would find this elusive solution, but how such a seemingly intractable problem could possibly be overcome before it was too late. The nation held its breath, waiting for a miracle, for a hero, for a flash of genius to pierce the gathering gloom. To truly grasp the magnitude of the challenge, and indeed the sheer ingenuity of the solution that eventually emerged, we must descend into the intricate mechanics of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine itself, specifically its fuel system. The Merlin, a magnificent feat of engineering, was a 27-liter liquid-cooled V12 piston aero engine. It was an engineering marvel of its time, renowned for its smooth operation, its impressive power output, and its generally robust reliability under most flight conditions. It delivered the raw thrust that made the Spitfire and Hurricane not just competitive, but truly formidable adversaries in the aerial battles of World War II. However, its Achilles heel lay not in its fundamental design or the quality of its construction, but in a specific component crucial for its operation, the carburetor, and its inherent limitations when confronted with the brutal realities of combat maneuvers. Most piston engines of that era, including the Merlin, relied on carburetors to precisely mix fuel and air before combustion within the cylinders. A carburetor, in essence, is a relatively simple device in its foundational principles. It operates on the Venturi effect, the scientific principle that states fluid velocity increases as it passes through a constriction, causing a corresponding drop in pressure. This pressure differential is then used to draw fuel into an airstream, creating the combustible mixture necessary for the engine to run. The fuel itself is held in a small, precisely designed reservoir within the carburetor, famously known as a float chamber. The fuel good, a magnificent feat of engineering, was a 27-liter liquid-cooled V12 piston aero engine. It was an engineering marvel of its time, renowned for its smooth operation, its impressive power output, and its generally robust reliability under most flight conditions. It delivered the raw thrust that made the Spitfire and Hurricane not just competitive, but truly formidable adversaries in the aerial battles of World War II. However, its Achilles heel lay not in its fundamental design or the quality of its construction, but in a specific component crucial for its operation, the carburetor, and its inherent limitations when confronted with the brutal realities of combat maneuvers. Most piston engines of that era, including the Merlin, relied on carburetors to precisely mix fuel and air before combustion within the cylinders. A carburetor, in essence, is a relatively simple device in its foundational principles. It operates on the Venturi effect, the scientific principle that states fluid velocity increases as it passes through a constriction, causing a corresponding drop in pressure. This pressure differential is then used to draw fuel into an airstream, creating the combustible mixture necessary for the engine to run. The fuel itself is held in a small, precisely designed reservoir within the carburetor, famously known as a float chamber. The propeller, moments before a shimmering blur of unstoppable power, now begins to windmill lazily, mockingly in the rushing air, a silent testament to a dead engine. The gauges on the instrument panel, so recently alive with the vibrant dance of performance indicators, now slump lifelessly, their needles resting at zero, mocking his predicament. The pilot's stomach lurches, not just from the dizzying dive, but from the sickening, chilling realization of what has just occurred. His engine is dead. Utterly, irrevocably dead, in the middle of a combat dive, above enemy territory. His world has just shifted from hunter to hunted in the blink of an eye. This was not a graceful, controlled glide to safety. This was, in essence, a catastrophic failure, often without any prior warning, no chance for preparation. The aircraft, now transformed into little more than a very heavy, unpowered glider, continued its downward trajectory, accelerating rapidly with the relentless pull of gravity. Panic, cold and visceral, would grip the pilot with an icy fist. He would instinctively yank back on the control stick with all his might, straining against the G-forces, desperately trying to pull out of the plummeting dive. But without engine power, the controls felt sluggish, unresponsive, heavy as if made of lead. The Spitfire, a marvel of agility and responsiveness just moments before, became a ponderous, unwilling beast, its aerodynamics now a curse rather than a blessing. He might try, with shaking hands and a pounding heart, to restart the engine, frantically following emergency procedures, mixture rich, fuel pump on, throttle open, but often to no avail, or, crucially, too late. The relentless flooding had saturated the cylinders with raw fuel, making immediate reignition a near impossibility. The spark plugs fouled, the combustion process utterly extinguished. The vulnerability was absolute, terrifying in its completeness. A lone Spitfire, plummeting silently from the vast, empty sky, was not just crippled, it was an easy target, a sitting duck for any opportunistic German fighter patrolling below, a momentary flash of silver against the backdrop of war. Or, more commonly, it simply continued its uncontrolled dive, rapidly approaching terminal velocity, until the structural limits of the aircraft were violently reached, ripping wings and tail from the fuselage, or the unyielding ground rushed up to meet it with sickening, fatal finality. Even if the pilot managed, by some incredible stroke of luck or superhuman skill, to pull out of the dive, perhaps at a dangerously low altitude, scraping the treetops or the unforgiving waves of the English Channel, he was utterly and definitively out of the fight, forced to limp back to base, a humiliating, terrifying retreat, his mission an abject failure. He had been denied the opportunity to defend his homeland, not by the superior skill or firepower of the enemy, but by the insidious, internal betrayal of his own magnificent machine, a silent, invisible killer in the mechanical heart of his aircraft. The emotional impact of this constant lurking threat cannot be overstated. Pilots, young men rigorously trained to be fearless, decisive, and masters of their machines, were now forced to contend with an insidious enemy within their own aircraft. Every single time they contemplated a dive, a crucial tactical maneuver, often vital for survival or success, a tiny, insidious seed of doubt would sprout in their minds, blossoming into a chilling question. Would the engine cut out this time? This hesitation, however slight, however momentary, was a critical handicap in the lightning-fast decisions and razor-thin margins of aerial combat. It meant they couldn't press home attacks with the full conviction and unhesitating aggression required. It meant they might pull out of a dive too early, missing a vital shot, or allowing a dangerous enemy to escape unmolested. It meant they were flying with a self-imposed limitation, a hidden psychological and mechanical constraint that the enemy did not share. German aircraft, particularly the ubiquitous Messerschmitt Bf 109, had, as mentioned, fuel-injected engines, which were inherently immune to this carburetor-based problem. They could dive with impunity, with absolute confidence in their engines, leaving their British counterparts at a profound, almost crippling tactical and psychological disadvantage. This wasn't just about individual pilots facing personal terror and frustration. It was a systemic problem threatening the very fabric of national defense. Imagine the briefing rooms, the grim faces of squadron leaders, their voices heavy with fatigue and loss. Another Spitfire lost to a dive. Pilot couldn't recover, engine cut out. The reports accumulated daily, a dreadful, mounting tally of lives and irreplaceable machines. The morale of the entire RAF Fighter Command, the very backbone of Britain's resistance, was subtly, insidiously undermined, eroded by this relentless internal attrition. How could they maintain an aggressive, confident defense? How could they protect Britain's skies from relentless enemy attack when their primary fighters were so susceptible to a crippling, self-inflicted wound, a mechanical Achilles heel? The Spitfire, the beloved symbol of hope and defiance, was becoming, in these moments of diving failure, a symbol of tragic vulnerability, a reminder of the fragility of their valiant stand. Engineers at Rolls-Royce and the RAF knew of the problem, of course. It wasn't a completely uncharted territory or a total secret. Early flight tests, even before the war, had revealed some issues with negative G-forces affecting engine performance, but these were often dismissed as minor or easily mitigated. But combat conditions were far more extreme, far more violent, and far more sustained than anything simulated in a peacetime test environment. And the true scale, the devastating impact of the problem became dramatically and undeniably apparent only when the life or death pressures of the Battle of Britain began in earnest. Initial attempts to fix it were often complex, involving fundamental changes to the carburetor design or even radical proposals to shift entirely to fuel injection. These were massive, time-consuming, resource-intensive endeavors, requiring extensive retooling, years of development, and significant redesign, luxuries that wartime Britain simply could not afford. The Luftwaffe was not waiting for an engine redesign. The very clock of existence was ticking loudly, threatening to run out. The problem at its core was a fluid dynamics issue, compounded by the inescapable realities of gravity, inertia, and the violent maneuvers of aerial combat. The fuel in the float chamber, normally held in place by the carefully balanced float and the simple weight of the fuel itself, would, under negative G-forces, simply lift. It would then rush, unchecked, unregulated, and in overwhelming quantities through the main jet, completely overwhelming the engine with an unmanageable quantity of raw liquid gasoline. The engine would choke, misfire violently, and cease to function, its intricate combustion cycle grinding to a halt. A crucial element of controlled combustion, the precise, delicate mixing of fuel and air, was utterly destroyed by this momentary inversion of gravity's influence, leading to mechanical asphyxiation. It was a problem that seemed to demand an equally complex, perhaps revolutionary solution, one that only the most brilliant minds could conceive. Yet time was rapidly running out, slipping away like grains of sand through an hourglass. And with each falling grain, the prospect of an invaded, defeated Britain seemed to grow more real, more terrifying, heralded by the silent, terrifying descent of a once mighty Spitfire. The mechanical heart of Britain's defense was failing under pressure, and the desperate search for a remedy, any remedy that could be deployed swiftly, had become an absolute, undeniable matter of national survival. The grim reality of the Merlin engine's fatal flaw did not go unnoticed by the highest echelons of the Royal Air Force or by the venerable, prestigious engineers at Rolls-Royce. Indeed, the problem had been observed, almost an academic curiosity, in early flight tests and theoretical models, but its true devastating impact only became horrifically, undeniably apparent under the relentless, unforgiving crucible of aerial combat during the Battle of Britain. The urgency to find a swift, effective solution escalated from a mere technical challenge to a matter of absolute national strategic imperative. The very future of the war, the existential survival of Britain as a free nation, depended on restoring the Spitfire and Hurricane to their full, uncompromised combat potential, and doing so with unprecedented speed. The pressure on the engineering teams involved, both within the hallowed halls of Rolls-Royce and in the bustling, often chaotic, repair hangars of the RAF, was immense, almost paralyzing in its intensity. Rolls-Royce, a company synonymous worldwide with precision, unparalleled reliability, and engineering excellence, found its hard-won reputation and arguably its very pride on the line. Their masterpiece, the Merlin engine, a triumph of British ingenuity, was revealing a fundamental, critical vulnerability in the most brutal and public of proving grounds, the skies over their own homeland. At the same time, RAF engineers, those dedicated, practical, hands-on individuals working tirelessly, often around the clock, in maintenance depots across the nation, were confronted daily with the tangible, heartbreaking consequences of the problem. Damaged aircraft, frustrated and often terrified pilots, and the grim, ever-increasing casualty reports. They were the ones who saw the physical evidence of crashes, heard the first-hand accounts of near-fatal dives, and felt the palpable, crushing weight of the impending invasion hanging over their heads like a sword of Damocles. The conventional approaches to solving such a complex and multifaceted problem typically involved extensive redesigns, fundamental alterations to the engine's core components, or the wholesale replacement of problematic systems with entirely new, unproven technologies. One obvious, albeit monumentally challenging, solution that was frequently discussed was the wholesale adoption of direct fuel injection. German aircraft, particularly the formidable Messerschmitt Bf 109, largely utilized highly effective direct fuel injection systems, which did not rely on a float chamber and were therefore inherently immune to the fuel starvation or catastrophic flooding issues caused by negative G-forces. This technological superiority provided them with a significant tactical advantage, allowing their pilots to dive with aggressive abandon, secure in the knowledge that their engines would not falter, that their power would be constant and reliable. However, transitioning from carburation to a sophisticated direct fuel injection system for the Merlin engine was not a simple plug-and-play upgrade that could be achieved overnight. It represented a truly massive, gargantuan undertaking. It would require a complete, ground-up overhaul of the entire fuel delivery system, demanding new, high-pressure pumps, newly designed injectors for each cylinder, complex new control mechanisms, and an entirely new philosophy of engine management and manufacturing. Such a fundamental redesign would necessitate years, not months, of intensive research and development, extensive prototyping of new components, rigorous testing under all conceivable conditions, and the complete retooling of vast manufacturing facilities, a process that itself would take years. In 1940, with the enemy literally at the gates, with invasion seemingly imminent, Britain simply did not have years. It barely had months, perhaps even weeks, before the aerial battle reached its decisive climax. The nation's industrial capacity and engineering manpower were already stretched to their absolute breaking limits, producing existing engines and aircraft to meet the insatiable demands of the ongoing conflict. To halt or significantly slow this vital production for a radical redesign was utterly unthinkable, a strategic suicide that would hand victory to the enemy on a silver platter. Other, less drastic, but still significant, proposals revolved around modifying the existing carburetor to mitigate the effects of negative G-forces. Engineers explored a myriad of ideas, adding intricate baffles to the float chamber to physically prevent fuel sloshing, designing more sophisticated G-force compensating float mechanisms, or even introducing pressure-sensitive valves. Each of these proposals, while theoretically sound and meticulously detailed on paper, came with its own formidable set of practical challenges. How do you implement such a change without adding undue weight or complexity to an already finely balanced and exquisitely tuned engine? How do you ensure absolute reliability across thousands of engines already in the field, subject to the brutal rigors of combat?
How do you mass-produce a complex modification in a country under constant aerial bombardment, with critical supply chains disrupted, raw materials scarce, and skilled labor diverted to other vital war efforts? The questions piled up, each one more daunting than the last, leading to frustrating dead ends. The technical difficulties were further compounded by the very nature of the problem's manifestation. While the root cause, negative G-forces affecting the carburetor's fuel distribution, was generally understood, precisely how the fuel behaved under various G-loads at different altitudes, speeds, and angles of attack was incredibly difficult to model accurately or test comprehensively in a controlled environment. Simulating sustained negative G-forces on an engine testbed for prolonged periods was a complex and imperfect science. Real-world combat conditions were, by their very nature, utterly unpredictable and chaotically violent. This meant that any potential solutions often had to be implemented and tested under the very conditions they were designed to mitigate, in actual aircraft, flown by actual pilots, often taking significant, life-threatening risks. This agonizing cycle of trial and error was inherently slow, incredibly costly in terms of resources and time, and, most tragically, inherently dangerous for the men who flew these experimental fixes. Moreover, there was an element of deeply entrenched institutional inertia at play. Large, established corporations like Rolls-Royce, while populated by brilliant engineers, often adhered to traditional, conservative engineering methodologies. Solutions tended to be complex, elegant, perfectly integrated, and meticulously refined over years of development. A quick, potentially dirty, or overtly unconventional fix, even if demonstrably effective, might be viewed with a degree of skepticism or even outright disdain by engineers steeped in decades of meticulous, high-precision, and aesthetically perfect work. The idea of a simple, almost crude external solution was perhaps antithetical to the ingrained philosophy of high-end aero engine design. Pride in craftsmanship, though understandable, could sometimes hinder innovation when rapid, pragmatic solutions were paramount. The frustration among the pilots, the ground crews, and the engineers grew almost unbearable, a simmering discontent that threatened to boil over. Fighter pilots, the undisputed elite of the RAF, were being asked to fly into deadly combat with a known, potentially fatal flaw in their primary weapon system. They